Welcome to my lair. Don't know what that was. Anyway, I'm going to talk about fault lines. Fault Lines is a book by Emily Itami. Emily Itami was born and raised in Tokyo and has since moved to the UK where she is currently based, I assume in London, I don't know. She wrote the novel in English, and I'm not sure of her cultural background. I assume that she speaks fluent Japanese. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm not going to speculate. Point is, Fault Lines is a really good book. The story of my relationship with this book goes like this. There's a shop in London, in North London, in Islington, called Book Bar. Book Bar is a brand new bookshop that hosts book clubs, sells wine and coffee, and is really small and intimate and lovely. And I was in there and I was chatting with the owner and she recommended me this book. It had just come out, it's nice and short, 200 pages, and that was exactly what I was looking for. I like 200-page hardcover pretty books. That's my jam. And she promised me, despite the blurb, that this book is quite uplifting and quite sweet and quite funny. And yeah, it is. It's a really charming, delightful book. And I want to talk about it. Fault Lines tells the story of Mizuki. Mizuki is a middle-aged Japanese housewife, and she wants to jump off her balcony. She is in her apartment with her husband. She's got 2 kids between the ages of 0 and 10. One's a little bit older than the other. And she is just about ready to just clamber over her railing and fall to her death. It's not that she's depressed, it's that she is nothing. She is void of feeling, which some people argue is what depression feels like, but her life doesn't have anything. Even though she has a husband and 2 kids, she personally has nothing to be proud of, has nothing to excite her. She is just going through the motions. She is a bored Japanese housewife with a depressed, exhausted, uncaring, unloving, ordinary, bland Japanese salaryman for a husband. She's got 2 kids who seem pretty lovely and sweet, as much as most kids are, and she needs something more. And that's when she meets Kiyoshi. Kiyoshi is a interesting man. He's a restaurateur. He started off with a small restaurant, I think it's in Akihabara, like he started this tiny little ramen place in Akihabara, and since then he has built a small empire of restaurants. And he used to live in France, and he speaks French, and he used to have a French wife, and so he's got this exotic life. But so did Mizuki. She used to live in New York City. She speaks fluent English. She had this lovely friendship with this New Yorker girl, and she lived with her for several years. And Mizuki came very close to becoming a professional singer while she was living in New York City, and has since moved back to Japan and just become an ordinary housewife. And it is not doing it for her. So when she meets Kiyoshi, she convinces herself that she's made a new friend, this guy that has an interesting life and has pretty much had a similar background culturally, linguistically, opportunity-wise to her, but actually made something of it. And she thinks, okay, I've made a new friend, and he's going to just give me a little bit of an interesting existence. He's going to give me someone to talk to and bare my soul to and have fun with. But she also knows deep down what's really happening here is that she has an enormous crush on Kiyoshi, and she is hoping that she will have an affair with him, that she will be able to fall in love again, that she will experience first kisses and first sexual encounters all over again later in her life with this very charming and interesting man. But she can't admit that to herself. She says, no, this is a new friend of mine. I'm not going to tell my husband about him because reasons, but I'm going to just have fun with this new friend. We're going to go out, hang out, we'll go to the park, we'll talk, we'll have food, whatever. Maybe bang. Who said that? She wants an affair. She won't admit that she wants an affair. She doesn't want an affair. What are you talking about? She wants an affair. Kiyoshi is sexy, Kiyoshi is handsome, Kiyoshi is effortlessly charming. And as the story goes on, I like how Emily Itami also moves us back and forth. I already told you that she lived in New York City and almost became a singer, but you don't actually find that out until about halfway through the book, maybe? Can you hear those birds? That was nice, wasn't it? We are fed information very much piecemeal, out of order, as Emily Itami feels fit to do so. We learn about her time in New York very early on, but we learn more about it later on, and it builds Mizuki's personality, rather than Mizuki being thrown at us as a character at the beginning, wholly, fully formed, and then we go on this journey with her to meet Kiyoshi, etc, etc. No, we continuously learn little bits of information about Mizuki as the book goes on. Even the ones I've already told you are only some of it. There's more. There's always more. Really interesting stuff about her parents and the town that she grew up in. She grew up in this tiny little nowhere town. I don't think it even says what the name of the town is. And we keep learning more about it. Her dad had a really interesting life, and you'll find out about that when you read it. But we continue as we go through the book to learn more about her. So whatever you know at the beginning is not the whole story. And the story of the book does not really happen out of order. We're just continuously given little flashbacks and anecdotes that flesh out her character a little bit, and her husband's character, and her kids, and her parents. And it continues to build. So even her pathetic, hollow salaryman husband has a personality, and he has an arc. And things happen to him, and we learn more about his past as well as it goes. But this again is very much Mizuki's story, and she's a very, very sweet and charming character. She's unlikable to a point because she's taking a lot of things for granted, she's being a little bit selfish, she wants more from her life, she's considering having an affair, and her husband hasn't really done anything wrong, except that he actually also had an affair a few years ago, and they just had to kind of move past it for the sake of their kids and their marriage, I guess, or perhaps because they just, neither of them could care enough to deal with it and talk about it. It's not really clear. It's a really briefly thrown out there thing, but it's enough to make you think, oh, well, fuck this guy then. If she wants to have an affair, good. And so you are on her side, but at the same time you do recognize, oh, poor husband. Guy's obviously depressed as much as she is, overworked, etc. You know, everyone is sympathetic to a point and also unlikable to a point, and that's very, very human. And that's what makes Fault Lines such a charming book. But it does manage to steer away from being too heavy, too depressing, because Itami has this lovely, jovial sense of writing. She is playful with her language. Her characters are almost twee sometimes. As I said at the beginning, she wants to jump off her balcony. But it's not told in this horrible, horrible, heavy, bleak manner. It's offhanded. It is almost a throwaway joke kind of a thing. You recognize the weight of it, you recognize her mental health issues, but you don't dwell on them. They don't weigh you down, and they don't put you in a bad mood or bad spirits as you're reading the book. You just carry on, and she just carries on, and that makes it really sweet. It's a very short book, it's 200 pages, I think I read it in 2 days, and I'd actually put it off for a while. I wasn't ready to read it for whatever reason, even though I'd been recommended it by someone who definitely shares my tastes, and I was so happy when I went into Book Bar. If you're in London, if you're in the UK, if you have a chance, go into Book Bar, they are fantastic. I'm going to try and do an interview video with them at some point, we'll see what happens. It's kind of a plan I have to interview bookshop owners around London, we'll see. Anyway, I should have gotten to Fault Lines sooner, but at the same time, in my last video I did say that I was in a massive reading slump and I had to be pulled out of it first. Since ending that reading slump, I have read 3 hardcover 200-page books in a row that I've torn through over the course of a single weekend, and this was the first of them, and it was just perfect. And I love Japanese literature. And even though Emily Itami is now UK-based and wrote this in English, it's still a Japanese novel through and through. It is a book that does a lot to explore modern Japanese society. The salaryman, the depression, the overworking, the bored housewife, all of these things. And there's also just physicality to it. There are objects and places and things in this book that speak to modern Japanese cultural aesthetics that we all kind of enjoy. And you'll just find place names, neighborhoods, types of buildings, subway stations, whatever. Especially if you've been to Tokyo, you spent any time in Tokyo, you'll recognize it. You'll be able to kind of piece it together as you go, and you'll know where she is and what she's doing and what she's experiencing. And if you haven't, and you just have a general interest in Japanese society, if you've watched any anime or any movies, you'll still get it. It's not overly complicated. It's not referencing cultural things you won't understand. But if you are familiar with them, there's an added, oh, I know what that is, kind of sense to it, which is always just wholesome, I guess. Anyway, this is supposed to be a short video, just talking about how Fault Lines is a very, very charming, sweet book. It also is really good for mothers and motherhood. I think it would be very interesting if you're a mother, if you're a wife, if you're a married person who can sympathise with some of what she's going through, Mizuki's life is a relatable one. And it would be very intriguing to see how married people, and especially people with children of their own, respond to a book like this. I'd be very interested to see that. I don't have any kids, I will never have any kids, and so I can only relate to this to a certain point. But I'd love to know what people with kids think when they read this. Good. Subscribe for books.